Hello, my name is Sophie and welcome back to my channel. I think this is the first video I'm actually filming in 2025 because what happened over Christmas is that I think I got a little bit burnt out and I had a couple of videos that took longer for me to edit than I anticipated, and then I got a bit overwhelmed, but we're here. Is it the middle of the month and I'm doing a wrap up? Yes. Anyway, let's combine this wrap up and January's TBR and I'll get you up to date on everything I've been reading. In December, I managed to read 7 books. I read all of those books before Christmas, so technically I read 7 books in 3 weeks, and then the last week and a half of the month/year, I just stumbled through because I was so busy over Christmas and I was just trying my best. So the 7 books I finished, 2 of them were carryovers from November, so they were on my November TBR and I started reading them in November, but I didn't finish them until the first few days of December. And then the other 5 were from my December TBR. Let's just jump right in. So the first book I finished, also before I do jump right in, I have rearranged my library, so now all the books you can see on these Billy bookcases behind me are my unread physical TBR. All of my read physical TBR is over here, and then over here I've got all my Christmas books and then my husband's books. So all of these books behind me are unread, and that's not overwhelming even a little bit. But in doing the big reshuffle, I've put all of my books that I read in December in the read section, and this section is a little bit haphazard, and there is a lot of piles of books that I wouldn't say are particularly accessible, so I won't be getting out the books I read in December, but I'll put some pictures in, so there'll be a visual element, don't you worry. Also, I got a microphone for Christmas. I'm joining the Tiny Mic crew, so hopefully this actually helps with the audio quality. The TikTok audio quality has been better, so hopefully it transfers here on YouTube as well. Anyway, jumping right back in, like I said we would. The first book I finished was the first book in the Crescent City series, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. This was my first ever Sarah J. Maas video. No, it wasn't. My first Sarah J. Maas book, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic. I'd heard a lot of people saying that it was just all world building and there wasn't much plot or character development, and I disagree wholeheartedly. I thought the characters were really fleshed out. I liked the variety of characters. I really liked the urban fantasy setting, and I thought the plot was really engaging. For a book that was 800 pages and nearly 28 hours long, I listened to this predominantly as an audiobook. I really thought that the pacing would be a little bit slow, but I found I was completely engaged the whole way through, and I really enjoyed it. I have since been advised that I'd be better off reading A Court of Thorns and Roses before I finish Crescent City because some of the characters overlap. So, especially considering I don't own any of the other books in the Crescent City series, I'm not rushing into book 2, but I do have ACOTAR on my radar for 2025. It's not on any of my lists, and realistically, being able to finish that series will be a challenge for me, but it's on my radar and we may get there. We'll try our best. We've clearly got a lot on our unread physical TBR. The second book I finished was Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree, and I think I rated this one 4 stars in the end. I thought, ironically, considering I just finished an 800-page brick, I thought that I didn't think pacing would be an issue in a book as short as Legends and Lattes, but actually I found this got really, really slow in the middle. I liked the characterization, I liked the cozy fantasy, and there was actually more plot in this story than I thought there would be, because I've seen a few people saying that, again, this one is all vibes and there isn't actually really anything going on, but there was a little bit of something going on and that kept me hooked enough. But there was a bit in the middle where it was really, really slow. So I can see where people are coming from. But yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun. But I'm not running to my local bookstore to get Bookshops and Bone Dust, the prequel. So I think that says everything. Then the next book I finished was Strong Female Character by Fern Brady. This is a non-fiction memoir, which I thought would be more about Fern's life, but actually it is predominantly about autism, but then I felt stupid for thinking otherwise because as an autistic person, autism isn't something you can separate from yourself. There's not an autistic version of you and a neurotypical version of you. You are autistic all the time. So it makes sense that so much of this book is autism because there is no Fern without autism. But either way, I rated this book 5 stars. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. The audiobook is a must. Hearing this story told in Fern's voice is, I think, the only way that it should be heard or listened to or read or engaged with, whatever terminology you want to use. The balance between comedic but also quite harrowing anecdotes and academic research that was presented in a really accessible way was perfectly balanced, and I really, really enjoyed this. I like engaging with stories about autism. Like I said, I am an autistic person, so it makes sense that I like reading about something that is essentially like a presentation of myself on page. But yeah, it was really, really interesting, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The next book I finished was my first ever Alice Oseman book that isn't in the Heartstopper universe. I read Radio Silence, and again, 5 stars. I had a lot of 5-star books in December, and I have absolutely no regrets. Radio Silence was wonderful. At first, I thought it was a little bit, not cringy. I think something Alice Oseman does really well is writing teenagers that have depth and aren't cringy. But I thought Frances as a main character was a little bit irritating, especially with how much pressure she put on herself that wasn't coming from any other external source. Normally with characters that are really, academically gifted, you have a lot of pressure coming from home or from teachers, but actually all of the pressure Frances put on herself came from herself, which I did think was an interesting perspective. But the one thing I think Alice Oseman does really, really well is having a really accessible, easy to read writing style, but also addressing really important topics in a way that is, like I said, accessible for anyone who wants to read it. So I think the main topics in this book were identity, friendship, and mental health. Like, the way that those topics were covered was so well done, and having the skill to write something so meaningful but so easy to read is really, really tricky. Really, really enjoyed reading that, and I also listened to that one as an audiobook, which I borrowed from my library, which was lovely. Then I listened to the audio exclusive Ali Hazelwood short story Two Can Play. I think this was exclusive to Spotify, but I have seen it on other audiobook platforms, so I don't really know what's going on with this. But I wasn't expecting to rate it at all because it is a novella. So I know a lot of people don't rate novellas because there's not enough story to really get invested in the characters or to really have much of an opinion. But honestly, I think this was perfect. I rated it 5 stars. I loved the characters. I loved the story. I loved that they were both game designers and they were both just secret little nerds, and it was really, really sweet. The enemies to lovers thing felt a tiny bit forced, but I just lapped it up. I love Ali Hazelwood's characters. I love Ali Hazelwood's writing. And I listened to this at the perfect time for me, and I just devoured it. Really, really enjoyed it. Surprisingly spicy, considering it is only like 4 hours long as an audiobook. Then the one and only Christmas book that I managed to read before Christmas, I got the audiobook for the Christmas Book Club by Sarah Morgan from my library. I believe this is marketed as the book club hotel in other areas of the world. I've seen both Australian and American booktubers talking about this book, but it's got a different cover and it's called the Book Club Hotel. But in the UK, it's called the Christmas Book Club. And I really enjoyed this. I went into it thinking it was a romance book, and whilst there was elements of romance in it, it definitely wasn't a romance story. It was definitely more women's fiction and about the kind of power of friendship and women being on different paths, even though they're the same age, and the fact that you don't need to like tick all these boxes to have been seen as successful, and how even though women will constantly compare themselves to other women, the women that they're comparing themselves to are also comparing themselves to you. A wonderful narrative on the complexities of being an adult. Basically, I don't think it's exclusive to being a woman, but all of these characters were female. It was lovely. The friendship elements were really, really sweet. It was very, very predictable, but there's an element of allowance that I make for that in a Christmas book because I want it to be hallmarky and cheesy. So it ticked every box for me, and I think I rated this one 4 stars in the end. And then the last book I read for the year was a little bit out of character, and I didn't really want it to be my last book of the year, but that's how it ended. It was my book club book pick for the book club I have with my husband, except it's not really with my husband because I'm the only one that really reads for it. But we call it the wedding book club because when we got married, we asked our guests to give us a copy of their favourite book. So we'd have a little library of our favourite people's favourite books. And in an endeavour to read them all, we take it in turns each month to choose a book, and then I read it and he doesn't. We're now moving on to a spinner method, so we're not going to take it in turns to choose each month. We're just going to use a spinner. But we're now in 2025, we're in our third year of the book club, and Lucas has so far read, I think, 2 of the books, and those aren't books that were already in the library. They're the new ones that we add to the library in our anniversary month. Anyway, the book was Midnight Express by Billy Hayes with William Hoffer, and Billy Hayes is a guy who went over to Turkey in the early 70s, I believe, and tried to smuggle out 4 ounces, a relatively small amount of an illegal drug, and got caught. And at the time, well, I imagine there's probably still political turmoil going on, but there wasn't any consistency in the prison system. So whilst Billy was under the impression that he would maybe make bail or only get a couple of years or even a certain number of months in prison, he was then sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. And the whole book is about the injustice that he suffered and his eventual escape from prison. That's not a spoiler, 1, because it's non-fiction, and 2, because it's in the blurb. I think I rated this 3 stars or maybe 3.5 stars in the end. My biggest issue was that Billy kind of described himself as being a completely innocent man despite trying to smuggle an illegal substance out of a country. And the black and white part of my autistic brain was just like, hun, you did do something illegal. Granted, the prison sentence you were served was disproportionate, but you did do something wrong. So it's not like you're completely void of blame. But yeah, it was fine. The narrative style was a little bit slow in places. It took me a little bit longer to read than anticipated, but I think William Hoffer, as the guy that probably guided Billy Hayes in his writing, as he was not a writer, he was a guy that was in prison for 5 years and then managed to get a book deal out of it. William Hoffer did a great job of making the narrative actually readable, and yeah, it was an interesting experience. And that was the last book I read in 2024. Now onto the fun bit, the January TBR. I've had the first books of my January TBR planned for several months, and I'm just going to jump straight into it. So I call my monthly TBR a functional TBR, not because I don't think other people's TBRs aren't functional, but because mine has one. So basically I have a bunch of categories and I have books that fill those categories, and then that is my monthly TBR. So those categories are the wedding book club that I already mentioned with my husband, a new book club that I'm starting with my sibling, where we try and work through some of the books that are on both of our TBRs, then any new releases that I've pre-ordered, a couple of books from my 25 in 2025 annual TBR, and then an other section if there's anything else I want to read. Starting with the wedding book club, the book that we chose using the spinner was Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene. Now, I must confess, I did go through the spinner several times to land on this book because it kept giving me massive Stephen King books. And then what else did it give me? It tried to give me books in the Jack Reacher series, and I've not decided how I'm going to approach that yet. Knowing what I had on the rest of my TBR, I wanted something a little bit gentler to start the year. So I'll probably be more honest with my spinner usage for this section in future. But for now, I picked out Our Man in Havana by Graham Greene, which is only just over 200 pages, and the audiobook is about 7 hours long. So I'm hoping this will be a relatively easy one to actually achieve this month. Then for the sibling book club I have with my sibling, we chose this book together on a trip into London last year, and we chose She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. I've nearly finished this book at this point in the month, and we're going to have our book club discussion of it tomorrow. But not a big fan. Probably will be rating it 2 stars, if not lower. But I'll talk more about that in the wrap up. So those are the first 2 books on my January TBR. Then we get to the new release, which is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, which is the 3rd book in the 4th Wing series, and then leads me on to talking about how I also have Fourth Wing and Iron Flame on my monthly TBR because I want to reread them before Onyx Storm comes out. At this point, nearly halfway through the month, I'm not even nearly finished. I think I'm less than halfway through Fourth Wing, and I've got just over a week, or maybe a week exactly, to finish Fourth Wing, read Iron Flame, and be ready for Onyx Storm. The likelihood of that happening is slim. So those are the next 3 books on my TBR, taking it up to 7. And then the last category is my 25 in 2025, which essentially the way I picked my 25 in 2025, I'll put a link to the video in the corner, but I just picked 25 titles out of my TBR jar to kind of basically make the list as random as possible, and so that I don't end up with a bunch of books on my physical TBR that I have been putting off for a while. It reduces the element of putting off books. But then I had another slightly smaller jar. I put all of those 25 titles in here, and then I don't know if you can see on top, there's 2 little slips of paper. My husband chose these ones out for me, and the first 2 titles he picked out were The X Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon, which I was very grateful for because I have no contemporary romance on this TBR, and I'm going to need something a little bit lighter between all of these fantasy books. So very much looking forward to that one. And then he also chose Maximum Ride, The Angel Experiment by James Patterson, which is the first book in a series that I adored when I was maybe 13, 14. And at this point in time, I have started rereading it and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I think if I was reading this for the first time, I would think it was cringy and awful, but because I'm not, and because I have a lot of nostalgia for this series, I'm having a wonderful time. So it will be on the kind of back burner in the back of my mind to be slowly getting through this series throughout the year. I've got 6 books that I own physically, but I think from my Storygraph research, there may be 11 or 12 books now. So it will be interesting trying to get through that series on top of everything else I'm trying to read this year. But my goal for this month, at least, was only to read the first one. So those are the 7 books on my TBR. At this point in time, I've started 3 of them, which were She Who Became the Sun, which I've almost finished, Fourth Wing, and Maximum Ride. And genuinely, even though I am always way more optimistic than I deserve to be in terms of my monthly TBR, I've started 3 out of 7 books at the midpoint of the month. So statistically, that's almost half. There might actually be a chance. I need to do some binge reading, that's for sure, but I do quite enjoy binge reading. No complaints from me. Either way, that's it for this week. That's my December TBR. That's my January... No, it's not my... Jesus Christ. That's my December wrap-up and my January TBR. Throughout December, I just about managed to post 2 videos a week, and I think I technically may have managed at least 1 video a week in the last couple of weeks between Christmas and New Year while I've been trying to adjust. But I've got enough ideas to continue doing 2 videos a week, at least for this month. I'm not sure whether it's something I'll be able to maintain, but it's something I can maintain for now. It may have taken me half the month, but I finally feel like I'm ready for the new year now. All my journals are ready, all my lists are ready, and it's taken a while, but I'm getting there. Thank you very much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today. Please do let me know what you thought, because I'd love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day. I hope you're reading a great book, and I'll see you next time for another bookish video. Bye!